Net migration to the UK goes up to 1/3 in 2015. It's bad news for David Cameron, who promised to get the figure down. Vote Leave campaigners say it proves immigration is out of control.
Well, I think they show the scandal of politicians continually promising year after year that they can cut immigration to the tens of thousands when they have absolutely no control.
Also on the programme tonight, violence in France. Protests boil over and half-term holidaymakers face disruption to ferries and flights.
Reclaim the internet, the call from campaigners taking a stand against online abuse. And
honouring a teenage VC hero who lost his life in battle 100 years ago.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Mark Austin.
good evening. The final net migration figures released just before the referendum were always likely to be controversial, and so it proved today, with the second highest on record. 333,000 more people came to the UK than left in 2015, many of them from within the EU.
Leave campaigners say it is yet more evidence that immigration is out of control. The Remain side admit the figures are disappointing, but insist quitting the EU will not solve the issue. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
Here's something you won't see often. Leave and Remain supporters dancing together in Winchester as they wait for Boris Johnson. Although once he arrived, it all got a bit chaotic. There were just too many people. Too many people coming to Britain is what he was campaigning on, and he started by using the immigration figures to lay into his own party's immigration policy.
Well, I think they show the scandal of politicians continually promising year after year that they can cut immigration to the tens of thousands when they have absolutely no control, provided we remain within the European Union.
Today we learned that last year's long-term net migration to the UK was 333,000. 184,000 of those were EU citizens, and a record 77,000 of those arrived looking for work, in other words, without a job. But migration into this country from outside the EU was higher still, at 188,000. Another familiar figure joined the referendum debate today, former Home Secretary Lord Blunkett.
The big number can only really be controlled if we leave the EU. I mean, the Leave campaign have got that right, haven't they?
The Leave campaign have not answered the fundamental question. What is it that you would do that would protect our borders in a way that we do not have the opportunity to achieve at the moment? They've got to answer the question, would we impose visas? What would the quotas for those visas be on the French, the Germans, the Italians?
In Southampton, just down the road from where Mr Johnson appeared, not everyone wants out, but those who do don't need such a clear answer on how immigration would be controlled.
I'm going to vote out. I have no objections to people coming here and working, but it's the people that come here and don't work and expect us to have handouts.
I think there's more cons than pros for mass immigration. It just doesn't work.
The mood in Winchester didn't stay quite so jovial. The pro-Remain protester in the gorilla suit later claimed he'd been punched in the face. This debate is still a heated one. For all that heat, I think a little bit of light has been generated in the past couple of days. Yesterday, we saw that the consensus among economists, whether you agree with them or not, is that our economy would be at greater risk if we left. Today, these figures speak for themselves, really, in showing that it is probably a bit more difficult to control migration here if we stay. And if it is possible to boil this complicated campaign down into one simple equation, well, that would be one: the economy versus migration.
All right, Carl, thank you very much indeed.
Well, the issue of migration was discussed by David Cameron and other world leaders today at the G7 summit in Japan. And the heads of the European Council and the European Commission seemed to accept that it does have negative effects. Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, is at the summit. Chris, what did they say?
Well, Mary, David Cameron spent the day here in Japan, apparently too busy with G7 summit matters to find a TV camera to talk to about the migration figures back home. That is, despite the fact there are probably more cameras at this summit than in any other part of the world at the moment. Nevertheless, those cameras also caught the views of Europe's top 2 leaders on British migration. Now, the European Council President, Donald Tusk, first acknowledged that, yes, migration is probably one of the reasons, he said, for Euroscepticism in the UK. But then he said, perhaps not overly helpfully for the Remain campaign, that migration was a price worth paying for being a member of the EU.
We have to choose. If we prefer free movement, if we prefer the whole values of the EU, we have to accept also some negative results. It's not only the UK experience. It's this is the idea of Europe.
Now, it was at that same press conference that the man standing next to Mr Tusk, the Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, then attacked Boris Johnson, saying that all the things he said during this referendum campaign are not based on reality. Afterwards, a senior official at Mr Juncker's office then tweeted that if Boris Johnson was in charge in the UK and Donald Trump was in charge in the US, that, he said, would be a horror scenario. I think it's quite clear that Boris Johnson doesn't have too many friends at the top of the European Union.
OK, Chris Shipp in Japan, thank you.
And Europe's continuing refugee crisis claimed more victims today. Around 30 migrants are feared dead after a boat capsized off the Libyan coast. Italian Coast Guard today released new footage of another rescue. 500 refugees were saved from a single boat yesterday. There's been a sharp increase in the number of attempted crossings in recent days.
Now, there have been violent clashes between protesters and police in Paris as a wave of strikes causes growing disruption across France.
The blockade of oil refineries has left as many as half the country's petrol stations dry or low on supplies. Many flights have been cancelled and some cross-channel ferries too. We'll have the latest from Paris and Portsmouth in just a moment. First, Neil Connery has this report.
In the heart of Paris, riot police charge at demonstrators as protests on a national day of action turn violent. Smoke bombs and missiles filling the air as the anger over proposed labour law changes exploded. There were dozens of arrests here at this trade union march.
On the streets of Paris and across France, there's a growing sense of militancy. The longer this dispute goes on, the more its impact is being felt, and neither side seems prepared to back down.
With most of the country's oil refineries under blockade, queues at many petrol stations continue to grow, and so do drivers' frustrations.
How angry are you about that?
Oh, I'm very hungry, yes. I'm very hungry. Very, very.
How long have you had to wait here?
I wait for 20 minutes.
It's very painful for us. Painful.
The majority of the French people are in favor of real liberal reforms, but it's absolutely impossible to do in this country.
In the Channel port of Le Havre, thousands of dock workers took to the streets as these protests continue in many parts of the country. Back in Paris, the clashes continue this evening. This day of protests has brought disruption far and wide. There's no sign of compromise in the air as this industrial unrest plays out on the streets.
Well, there have been strikes at nuclear power stations today on some of the railway lines, part of the metro and some airports as well. But it is the concern over these fuel blockades that continue. Now, the government insists that they have 110 days of emergency petrol reserves left. They're urging the public not to panic buy, but all the time these shortages and queues continue to grow. And it is the fear of what happens in the coming days that is foremost in people's minds tonight.
Neil Connery in Paris, thank you.
And Duncan Golestani is in Portsmouth, where some ferry services have been cancelled. Duncan, give us an update. What's happening there now?
So we are seeing some travel problems for people trying to get over to France. It's not widespread, but enough to cause an inconvenience ahead of the bank holiday weekend. Let's take a look, starting with the ferries. And if you're travelling between Dover and Calais, those services are absolutely fine. But between here in Portsmouth, it's a different story. The Cherbourg and St Malo routes are suffering from delays, normally of around 1 hour, while services between Portsmouth and Le Havre have been cancelled yesterday, today, and that is going to go into tomorrow night, Brittany Ferries are saying. In terms of the roads, the AA and the RAC are advising drivers to top up on fuel already. They are hearing of people breaking down because they are running out of fuel over in France. And the air travel is not immune from that either. Ryanair and Aer Lingus have cancelled some services because of striking air traffic controllers. As always, the advice is to check before you travel. Plenty of services are OK getting over to France.
All right, Duncan, thanks very much indeed for that. And we'll have the latest travel updates on our website, including an interactive map showing where the petrol shortages are worst.
Moving on now, and there were warnings today that government plans to change pension laws to help Tata Steel workers would set a dangerous precedent. The Business Secretary, Sajid Javid, is considering changes to the way the pension scheme is funded. But there are fears that other schemes with similarly huge deficits would want to follow suit, as our business editor Joel Hills explains.
The fate of Tata Steel UK concerns staff past and present. There's plenty of interest in the company's assets, but the pension scheme is a liability that no one wants. Tony Taylor spent 44 years at the blast furnaces in Port Talbot. His income in retirement is on the line.
I think as pensioners who worked a long time, we deserve our pension. We've worked hard enough and we've contributed long enough. But we've also got a loyalty to the people that's left behind us.
The old British Steel pension scheme has 130,000 members. 2/3 of them are retired. The scheme's in deficit to the tune of £700 million. As it stands, pension income increases annually in line with the Retail Prices Index, which is currently 1.3%. One of the proposals is to change to the Consumer Prices Index, a lower measure of inflation, currently 0.3%. This would leave pensioners worse off, but better off than they would be in the Pension Protection Fund.
If our members were to go into the PPF, something like 60,000 out of 130,000 would take a very significant reduction in their pensions. I don't think they need to do that. I think there's plenty of money in the scheme for us to continue to pay the current benefits.
But the prospect of a change in the law has unsettled some MPs. Pension benefits are supposed to be set in stone.
We need to tread carefully. This is a very important issue, and it's absolutely right, as the honourable gentleman said, that we don't set any precedents where the House may come to regret them later.
There are almost 6,000 final salary pension schemes left in Britain, of which more than 4,800 are in deficit. Put another way, 80% of them can't currently afford to fund the pensions they promised. Steve Webb was the pensions minister in the last government.
It's one thing to put a solution in place to solve the problem of steel jobs and steel losses. The worry is if other employers and other pension schemes look at this and think we'd like to get rid of our pension losses as well, maybe this provides a way for us to do it, and suddenly millions of workers and pensioners' pensions are at risk.
If you were still pensions minister, would you agree to this?
I wouldn't go down this route.
The future of Port Talbot and 11,000 jobs rely on the government finding a solution to the pension scheme that no one wants. The consultation ends on June 23rd. Joel Hills, ITV News.
Now, half of misogynistic abuse on Twitter was posted by women, new research suggests. The survey was released as part of a campaign calling for an end to so-called trolling on all forms of social media. A group of cross-party MPs has joined forces to try to change attitudes and to reclaim the internet, as our political correspondent Romilly Weeks reports.
It is the dark side of the internet, trolling on a level that's meant many, and women in particular, are in danger of being shut out and shutting up. An experience that's been all too common for this Girl Guide leader's circle of friends.
When tweeting about feminism, they've been given threats of rape, and when posting photos on Instagram, any photos which involve pictures of their legs, they've received sexual comments and inappropriate comments from strange people that they've never met before, and they feel guilty.
As a cross-party group of MPs launch a national campaign to reclaim the internet, as they call it, research suggests the problem runs deep. Over a 3-week period, 10,000 aggressive and misogynistic tweets were sent by Twitter users in the UK, targeting 6,500 people. Of the abusers, 50% of them were women. For Yvette Cooper, this is about protecting everyone.
Teenagers suffering from online bullying that then affects what happens at school, or teachers being abused by parents and pupils. And you want the internet to be a positive space for everyone, to have those real open free speech debates, but that means people taking responsibility and standing up against abuse.
But some experts doubt it's possible to change the Wild West elements of the internet.
If we liken it to the real world, it's like having police on every street corner, policing us saying what we can and cannot say. And frankly, that's not practical for the internet. So I think as much as all this rhetoric is positive and everybody wants to stop abuse online, it's realistically not going to change very quickly.
For those being silenced by trolls, though, this is as simple as making people realise it's no more acceptable to behave abusively on the internet than it is in the wider world. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Police in Manchester have made their first arrest on the day new laws came into force banning the sale of so-called legal highs. A 23-year-old man from Rochdale is being held on suspicion of supplying a controlled drug. But despite the new legislation, there are warnings that the problem has not gone away. From the North West, our consumer editor Chris Choi reports.
Here in Greater Manchester, 9 people have been hospitalised in the last 6 days due to what used to be legal highs. In specialty shops across the area, today's legal changes leave empty shelves. But this user says making them illegal won't make them disappear.
I started smoking it 3 years ago when I was in jail. And it's just ruined my life.
Is this a chance for you now to get off of these substances?
It's still going to be out there, of course it is. I'm hoping that now it's out of the shops, I won't be going to the shop to find it.
This CCTV footage shows the effects of new psychoactive substances. Emergency services here in the North West say they can lead to violent, suicidal and antisocial behaviour. This ambulance service has attended up to 15 incidents a day involving the chemicals. Paramedics are desperate for people to appreciate the risks.
It's got to be to understand the horrendously terrifying, horrible effects that it has on the loved ones. When actually they assume their loved ones are out on a Friday, Saturday night having a good night, and actually the next contact they have is a phone call from a police officer or from a nurse at a hospital to say actually they are critically unwell in hospital, and that's a direct result of these drugs.
This has been chemistry cat and mouse, with suppliers reformulating to stay ahead of the law. This expert has collected samples from Manchester and warns that today's ban could be lucrative for black market dealers.
Now that the shops are no longer selling, how easy would it be for criminals to fill the market by making their own?
If organised criminals have access to clandestine laboratories where they're already manufacturing things like methamphetamine or ecstasy, they could potentially easily change their chemistry and get these samples and these compounds produced.
Sales lost by the shops could be the street dealers' gain, and overseas websites will continue to trade. Legal status has been altered. Changes in their actual availability remain less clear. Chris Choi, ITV News, Manchester.
Donald Trump has reportedly won the support of enough delegates to secure the Republican Party's presidential nomination. The Associated Press says it understands the billionaire will have the support of one more delegate than needed, but the result will not be finalised until the party's convention, which is in July.
The tennis star Maria Sharapova has been selected to play for Russia at the Rio Olympics, despite being suspended. The 5-time Grand Slam champion tested positive for the banned substance meldonium and was provisionally suspended in March.
Now, as we've heard, the rights and wrongs of EU membership has divided opinion again today, but in one part of the UK it's credited with bringing people together. In Northern Ireland it's boosted the economy and is even helping the peace process.
Yes, its land border with the Eurozone means trade with the Republic is vitally important. Worth nearly £2.5 billion last year, It also benefits from direct EU funding. By 2020, it will have received £1.5 billion to support peace projects. As part of his road to referendum journey across the UK, Martin Geisler travelled from the border town of Newry to Ballymena and Belfast to hear people's views.
This unremarkable stretch of road crosses the UK's border with Ireland. Apart from the odd foreign exchange sign, you'd never know. But it wasn't always like this, and it might not be for much longer. There's talk here of a hard frontier going back up if we vote to leave Europe. And in the border town of Newry, that's a real cause for concern.
Is it to go on a hard floor?
Paul Vallely started selling rugs on eBay. In just 9 years, he's turned a cottage industry into a £4 million a year business. He does a lot of trade with Ireland and beyond, and he fears a new border would be bad news for everyone in this part of the world.
I think we become a backwater in the corner of a country again, rather than right in the centre of the north-south corridor between Belfast and Dublin. Yeah, I think locally a lot of people would see it as a huge backward step.
But drive further into Northern Ireland and you'll find a whole spread of opinions. Siga Healthcare in Ballymena has been in business for as long as Paul's rug company, and it has the same turnover, but its boss has a very different point of view.
How's this forklift doing anyway?
He employs Europeans like Peter, the Polish forklift driver, but he wants out of the EU. A border wouldn't affect his business, he told me. In fact, he says, it'd be a good idea.
We need to do something to stop the free movement of people. We need to bring in people who are going to actually contribute to our economy, and there's no doubt that the 3 million that have come in have really contributed to the economy, but you can't keep on doing that, or the unrest within the United Kingdom will start to grow.
Politics is still a delicate business in post-conflict Northern Ireland, and borders have real symbolism here.
Oh, look at you!
Siobhan McQuaid teaches her school children not to see themselves as Irish or British. Being European, she says, is a safe space for them, a common ground. In the park beside her school, a fence used to keep rival communities apart. They've put a gate in it now. The barriers are coming down. But she fears a new divide could resurrect old hostilities.
We can see the impact through the generations of the Troubles on our parents and on the children in our schools. And we have been spending years trying to build capacity among our communities to help them build their self-esteem, build self-confidence, make themselves feel good about where they are from and who they are. And I just feel that Brexit may be a step in the wrong direction, a backward step for these people.
Northern Ireland is often overlooked in the Brexit debate, but there's more at stake here perhaps than anywhere else in the UK. This place has moved a long way in recent years. The coming weeks could well have a bearing on where it goes next. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Belfast.
And finally, relatives of one of the youngest people to receive the Victoria Cross remembered his bravery today. 16-year-old Jack Cornwall was manning a gun during the Battle of Jutland in World War I when his ship came under attack.
Despite being mortally wounded, he stayed at his post. Almost 100 years to the day, his heroism has been commemorated at a ceremony in East London. Nina Nana was there.
Today they honoured a local lad. In a park in East London, a century on, descendants of Jack Cornwall joined leading naval figures in remembering a teenager who died a hero. Jack, or Boy Cornwall as he was known, lied about his age at 15 to join the Royal Navy. He wasn't the only one, of course, but he was the only one of his gun crew left standing after the Battle of Jutland, a critical moment during the First World War as Britain and Germany faced each other for supremacy of the seas. His great-great-nephew took pride of place at today's ceremony, a Navy man like Jack and fiercely proud.
I can never fully imagine what he went through and what was going through his head, but to think that someone so young could sit there and be in a position like he was. He did have great courage and he wanted to do his part in what was happening.
As the battle raged, Jack Cornwall was mortally wounded but remained in his post, the sole survivor awaiting orders. He died a day later and was buried in a common grave until a public outcry resulted in a funeral with full military honours and then the Victoria Cross.
Although many in the Navy and the public were expecting a second Trafalgar, a huge annihilation of the German fleet, we retained control of the seas, and that was the vital thing.
It's what the likes of Jack Cornwall achieved that day. Very, very important.
Absolutely.
The Jutland centenary is next week. Then, as now, Jack's bravery will be saluted. Nina Nanar, ITV News.
That's it. Tom Bradby's here at 10.
From all of us, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.